Welcome to Value Through Vulnerability. This is a podcast that is dedicated to putting the human back into humanity. And I am so excited on this episode 58, to bring one of the leading human-centered people that I'm grateful to know onto the show, which is Mike Vacanti, who is a speaker, consultant, CEO advisor, but also founder of the Humans First Club. So good afternoon, Mike. How are you doing today?
Hello, Gary. I'm doing great. I'm so excited to be here in this conversation with you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. Look, there's going to be a lot of people that do know you listening to this podcast, but I'd really like you to introduce yourself and maybe let those that don't know you yet get a little bit more under the skin. So who is Mike Vacanti? What's your background? And what are you passionate about right now, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I'll hit the passion thing to start with, and then we'll go into the background a little bit, Gary. But the passion for me right now is really to see people come together and engaged around the belief that we can do better. And it really, for me, it's really that simple. It's embracing the hope that's available for us, and not only finding my way to the surface, but the joy in lifting others up as well. That's what I'm really passionate about. There's just great joy in that. And, you know, from a background standpoint, it was really 3 years ago that I went through a change from a professional standpoint, coming back to Minnesota from Seattle, Washington, where I spent 2 years doing my 5th merger and acquisition, and taking a look at what would be next. And this consulting was something that started out of necessity. And then the whole journey of figuring out what is it exactly that I am passionate about and that is interesting. And there was a whole background to that of going through a deep dive with a coach, and, you know, big thick packets for a 360 review from, you know, former employees, bosses, clients, partner organizations, even friends, and figuring out what was the experience around me from other people's perspective. And going through 5 mergers and acquisitions where my teams always performed extraordinarily well, even though there was chaos and fear and doubt surrounding those situations. I knew I was a common denominator, but I couldn't tell you why all those things happened. And this helped me understand and really get clarity around what some of those keys were. And so I built that into a program, and then started having a bunch of brilliant conversations that evolved and led to further ideas. And then I stumbled into this Humans First Club concept, and it truly has become the joy of my life. It's the most expensive and time-consuming volunteer thing I've ever done, but it is absolutely full of joy and opportunity to connect and meet people like you, Gary.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I love that richness, Mike. You talk about that experience of seeking out that 360 feedback. Have you always been comfortable to seek feedback from other people? Or is that something that's happened only in the last few years for you, out of interest?
Yeah, that was a new approach for me. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of trepidation going into it, actually. I have been pretty strong-minded in my beliefs, and that served me well. So I would say that I probably wasn't very open to feedback. There might have been some interest in feedback, only to know, you know, which point of the argument I needed to win. But but no, I never really sat back that open and willing. And it's amazing how profound that became in informing these last 3 years of, I think, tremendous personal growth. Old dogs can learn new tricks.
I love it. We're straight into myth busting, Mike. I love that. I absolutely love that. So can you pinpoint what was it, if you don't mind exploring that? What particularly was it for you as Mike that went, hey, I've not always been comfortable with seeking feedback proactively, but I feel now is my time to start doing that. What was going on for you at that point in time?
It was another turning point and another remaking of myself, Gary. And there's been times when I've been in job interviews and people have looked up and down my resume and said, Mike, this is interesting, but you really look like a job hopper. And of course, I wanted to respond to that saying, I could explain away those things, but I really wanted to say, job hopping is for underachievers. This is my fourth career. So I've been through a lot of significant changes. And this time I didn't have a lot of clarity on what that looked like. So there was a need there to look at things differently and try another path. I had been pretty confident in my path before, and this one I had uncertainty, and I asked for help, which is not something I'm very good at.
But I think it speaks to this podcast wonderfully. You had the vulnerability to seek input when you would not necessarily always have done so. So I just really applaud you for doing that. And what I think is powerful, you've just spoken to me about the acceleration or your personal growth the last 3 years since you did lean into that vulnerability. So isn't that fascinating? We lean into it and suddenly we explode.
Yeah, I love the way you frame that back to me, because I don't think I had really looked at it through that lens as clearly as you just helped me. But yes, it opened up so many pathways. Maybe even took down the barriers before me without having to worry about them, which is pretty phenomenal vision that it created.
That's so awesome. So can you speak a little bit about the Humans First Club? So obviously that's your most recent, you said it's costing you a lot of time and money. Hopefully your family's on board with that, Mike.
Yes, and it is interesting because I'm not going through this journey alone. My children, I have 5 children, and they're grown adults. They're on their own. They're doing very well. My brother tells me thankfully to my wife, but we, my wife and I have had a great time through this journey. While it's been uncertain, very, very, open discussions about where it can go. And we talk about, family wellness and everything else. Each decision we make, there can be gains and sacrifices. And I think that sometimes we need to weigh those sacrifices against the gains and maybe choose the sacrifice rather than the gain. And we've kind of together decided that being in a place of openness and of giving at this point of ourselves has been more beneficial to set up this next chapter of our lives or this next season than in getting and taking. And it provides so much. I think I have gratitude with that, and it really opens up possibilities, which is kind of core to what I get up and try to live every day and provide hope and encouragement and lift others into that sense of possibilities. I think that gets stripped away from us sometimes.
That's really, really beautiful. I want to come back to that stripping away point, Mike, but I really like what you said, because for me, what's coming up is when you talk about going with the sacrifice over the gain, as it were, for me, that's courage. That's being courageous to take a risk without assurance. Is that what you're speaking to? Or is it something different?
Yes, it is. It's an investment of a different kind, right? It's being willing to step away from what's known and comfortable. And certainly there is risk in the sacrifice because I didn't know what the outcome would be. And so, it's courageous stepping into that um, higher level of risk because I'm intentionally not setting the outcome. I'm only setting the plan for the path forward. And that's really counterintuitive to, what we're trained to believe and enact kind of in our days.
It's what's really lovely, like your level of, I've used this language of our mutual friend Kevin Monroe before, is the congruence of how you show up, Mike, by the different forms of media, us talking now, by the videos that you post on LinkedIn. It's a really wonderful thing to say. And I want to say I really appreciate how you do show up with that congruence, because I think with all these different media outlets, the ways we can channel our emotions, how we speak, how we communicate, it can be very easy to be misaligned with who we really are. And I think you seem to be really well aligned with who you are.
Well, that's a tremendous compliment, and I really appreciate that. The It starts really it's I have an intent when I start every day, Gary, and it's become a practice now for I guess I'm coming up on a year, but truly I start my day with quietness and some meditation, and I started zeroing in on a simple intent of 2 words, and I've mentioned them already here in the conversation, and that is lift others. And that is how I start my day. That becomes my true north, my intention. And at the end of the day, I finish with a reflection of 3 words. Is it better? Did I help someone today? Did I do something that made someone's day, or my family, or those around me, or somebody's business career, or a company? Did I do something today that made the world just a little bit better? And that's kind of how I measure myself day to day, is 5 words. It's really become simplified.
I think that's really powerful. I'm learning a lot from you with that, Mike, because we can overcomplicate, can't we? We can overthink our way down many rabbit holes. I've done it many times in my career. There's something in that simplicity, isn't there?
Well, there's so much complexity around us right now, Gary, and I think that's what's really driving, a lot of the I don't know, energy inside the Humans First Club right now. Is we're surrounded with so much complexity, and it's not going away. And we aren't finding the silver bullet to calm all that or put it to rest. I think that we truly are at an inflection point, that we're at a time when, with that complexity and volatility that's around us, we're seeing change at a more significant and a more rapid pace than at any time in history, and all indications are that it will accelerate. At the same time, we're at a point where our human capacity as a workforce for companies might be at one of its all-time lows. And that is a dangerous place. It's a dangerous place for us as individuals. It's a dangerous place for companies, for employers, to have lowered capacity at a time when the need for that human capacity is expanding. I believe that is the energy behind these conversations we're having around Humans First. How do we expand that human capacity at this time of need? and help each other through that. So yes, I think that not only do we make things complicated for ourselves, but a lot of it is a response to the environment. Things are complicated around us, and it's hard to believe we can solve by quieting down. It seems like we need to become part of the noise. And I think there's a lot of learning in that paradox.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think one of my interesting parts at the moment, having a lot of conversations, Mike, around, so everyone talks about, we're coming out of the Industrial Revolution, people are cogs in a wheel in a machine. Everyone has that language. But I think something that we're not really doubling down on is the clarity between the human, as you're looking at with humans first, and the process. So people talk about, the system or the organization or whatever, but I don't think we're being clear enough. I think what we're talking about is, if you really back the human to design a more human-centered process, everything will flow and will unleash human potential. If we rely on the process first and then hope the human will fit in, we will continue with the same issues. I'm wondering what your thinking is around that.
Well, I'm 100% with you on that, Gary, and I am, because that's been my experience. Is again, through those mergers and acquisitions, and I was running big business units, right? So there was sizable revenue that I had P&L responsibility for, and large teams of people, and it was in a complex industry in technology. And so what I learned is, we find that given the opportunity, people will amaze us. We just need to give them the opportunity. And it's less about orchestration and instruction, is allowing people to find that belief in getting to the outcome, and then finding their way to it. I do believe, again, through those 5 mergers and acquisitions, that people are capable of so much, and they don't need to be told and orchestrated how to get things done. In each situation, the processes that were in place were really built around everybody being the same. And so there was one best way to do something. Well, I was 40 years old before I was ever thrown into an organization that operated that way. I had been an entrepreneur the first couple of decades of my career, and so that thinking was not natural to me. And when I witnessed it, I never really bought in or agreed to it. So while my teams always did very, very well, I was told several times that the way I operated was not right. Even though you're doing 150% of objectives and things are wonderful, and you're getting bonuses and winning awards and doing all that, we don't like the way you do it. That's not the way we do it. And so when I look at process and people, Gary, I really think that having a great respect in the complexities of running a business, and operational excellence, and the things that are needed, and the responsibilities of making good decisions. We put a lot of pressure on senior executives, but they already have a lot of pressure on them. Decisions that they have to make are weighty, and they would rather not have to make all of those decisions. But I think that when I look at business and what can happen with a human-centered approach, is it's not all or nothing. We talk so much about disruption and transformation, and we talk about execution, and it kind of, we use these words, it sounds like walking through a forest with a machete, right? It's like everything's really pretty volatile, and it's going to need a violent reaction to create a path. And I think it's a series of small tweaks and consistency with that. And when we take a look at business, I'm getting to my point very slowly here, but if we take a look at each of the core processes of our business, and we simply take that one process isolated unto itself and say, what does that look like if we put humans first? Does anything in that process become reordered? Do we change that process? Does it help the process? So it's not ripping out all things business in current day and moving drastically to something else. It's simply realigning our thinking, our mindset, our priorities on each of the things we operate every day. And if we're operating with most of those things in a human-centered fashion, it's likely that they'll be more aligned. And it's likely that we can move people successfully through change. That's what I teach, consult on, believe in. And occasionally I find a client that's willing to go that route and believe in that also.
I love how eloquently you shared that, because there's a couple of things coming up for me. First of all, I was on this incredible 3-day leadership event with Next Jump, the software house, last Wednesday to Friday. And they spoke exactly to your point around what we'll call marginal gains. And what was really interesting though, Mike, was, and I never thought of it in this way, as you know, as the biological systems that we are as human beings, we can only deal, apparently according to science, with 2% change at any one time. Whatever that means to you, you know, whatever your system looks like. But it was just a real revelation for me that was like, oh my God, of course transformation is going to fail if we try and do 50, 60, 70% at once, because we physically cannot process it.
Well, and we think of how, you know, I go back and forth between using the word empower or emancipate, right? So if we want to emancipate ourselves from the current state, then what do we change? And part of that change, Gary, I think is there a way where everybody in the organization, that line managers, you know, down the organizational trail or outside, if we look expanding out toward the client, have the power to make decisions and operate where they're positively affecting their teams around them? And my answer to that is absolutely yes. And we can find ways to do that. What often happens is somehow we want to point back to the one person that has the big job and say, well, nothing will change till they change their mind. And I believe that we can do so much good work in the masses of an organization rather than trying to force an epiphany on the one person with the biggest job. It's wonderful if it happens, but the likelihood of creating positive change within an organization and having that affect the one person is greater than the waiting on the one person to affect change to the masses.
No, it resonates so much. And for anyone that's listening to us now, do have a look at, I believe, the Humans First Playground, which Mike has very recently published. Do go and have a look. It's an incredible platform. And I shared on there recently something Mike and I had a discussion about around an Accenture. They looked at 150 of their change projects and said, by far, most change comes from the middle out, or indeed, even like my example, my organization, bottom up. So just to reinforce your point, Mike.
Yes. And doesn't that provide great hope for us?
Absolutely.
Right. And the thing is, it's not that we have to give people more tools. There's a plethora of tools, and there's even better tools being created now. And the information that's going to be available through those tools will also exponentially increase. Where we have better data, we have better information, we can make more informed decisions, So how do we get that, out into the out to the edges for people? And I would say that if things are working out on the edges, that we would have very happy CEOs that, I also hear, Gary, very often, and friends of mine that are even, very aligned to the Humans First Club and the movement, and that say we need to put people before profits. And while I do not disagree with that statement, to me, it's never been an either or. My own personal experiences and journeys say that when we put people first, profits increase. We're not trading profits. We're actually expanding them much more naturally than forcing them, by allowing people to step into their best selves, to their best performance, and find that belief where their outcomes, their personal big objective, can be aligned to the company objective. And that's a point that I think has been a big miss. We haven't thought enough about creating that dynamic where people and their outcomes are aligned to the company outcomes. And then when they exceed them, we allow them the choice to move on from there. Thank them for their service. We allow people to grow their wings and fly away rather than try to hold them hostage. So then should we rethink retention measures, things like that? And, I've talked several different places and times about, I think that our measuring systems are something that we could advance, that there's room for rethinking our measurement systems. We find different ways to, take a look at who gets to put pencil or pen to the scorecard. Right? Peer review, 360, all the different, the ways to do assessments and measures and everything else. And I think sometimes maybe we should just put the pen down and rethink the scorecard itself. And I wonder where that would get us.
I love that. And something, for me, the metaphor for the scorecard is our people. Getting more of our people involved in the design of the scorecard. And particularly, as you're pointing to, Mike, those that are actually doing the job. Because this is really interesting. We talk about paradox a lot, but on the one side, I agree with you. Your senior leaders have got a lot going on. They could do without these extra pressures. But there's also an element of, we don't want to seem not to have the answer at the top. So there's all these really weird sort of counterintuitive power dynamics at different levels of the business, which if they just sat down and said, what do we want to be? How do we want to show up? What do we want this scorecard to look like in the future? I'm pretty sure they could do that in a couple of days.
Yes. And I think that there is some enlightenment going on in executive boardrooms, that there is some evidence of evolution taking place, which is a good thing. Mm-hmm. But it's time to connect our heart and our head, right? And until we truly are able to open up our hearts, and we put so much, Gary, into personal growth, and we so much about personal development and everything else, and finding our best selves. And I think if we switch and we just, instead of always focused on being our best selves, if we just become better lovers of people, that we can put some of that energy into others, and the whole then grows. And I think we become, residual benefactors of that.
No, I think it's lovely. I think for me, though, as part of my own journey, though, has been waking up. I've woken up midlife, age 40, to the fact that I completely agree with what you're saying, but at the same time, so many people don't feel whole in themselves. So
Right.
they're quite regularly giving themselves to others, but are not actually feeding their own soul. And I think sometimes it's almost it's a hyper extension towards serving others first, such that the self ends up feeling depleted. So it's a really difficult fine line, I think, at times.
Yes, and wouldn't it be a wonderful state when people can come and experience what they need to experience? That the help is there on either side of that, because those that are able to give are willing to give, and those in need um, are able to get that support and assistance, and we actually care about each other, so it happens, rather than being pitted against each other, right? And I mean, the system we've been in for a long time, all the stack ranking and everything else, I mean, I would like to believe that we can get to we can get to a pivot point from that. I think Jack Walsh in that era, I think he did brilliant work, and we should applaud that work at that time, and then agree that it's a good point to pivot from. That, stacking people into ranges and making them climb over each other to get to the surface is maybe not the best way to approach organizational development or human development. I think we can do better.
I love that, and I really love how synonymous it's becoming for me. But certainly within the network that you've created, the community within the Humans First Club is, as you say, there's no trade-off. There's absolute value in putting equal weight on your people and on your processes and on the business model. Because I think we should also need to be wise. Because I'm one of these people, Mike, that'll be like people, people, people. But of course, we need a robust business model as well. So I want to put that out there. We're not just talking woo-ha, kumbaya around the fire here. There needs to be a good business model, but with
Right.
the assumption, everything else I believe can be around the people.
Yeah, and for me, Gary, I think I have to have that congruency, or I have to have that alignment in my world, just because I've always been very competitive. I love to win, to the point that I kind of expect to win. And I think that goes back to my love of sports and athletics and everything as I was growing up, and continuing with that, and being able to put on that gladiator outfit and go at it. And like I said, for through my 20s, I was in family business. We had a family sporting goods manufacturing business, and so after coming out of my playing career, then I jumped into that business and did what I was natural to me, and what I kind of knew was right, without putting a lot of thought into it, or really even being told what I needed to do. So then in my 30s, when I made the switch, I had my own marketing company for 13 years. And again, invented products and brought concepts to products and retailers, and just did a plethora of many, many different projects. And so again, it was only by chance that I ended up in a roll up of a large technology company, and at an executive level, and all of a sudden I was in a 156,000 person organization, and that seemed to change everything. I remember being 40 years old, Gary, and just kind of looking around at that point, just thinking, what happened to all these people? who because what seemed normal for them was very abnormal for me. I didn't know restrictions. I didn't know that you couldn't just go out and win the game. And I like to bring that belief and hope back to people, that they deserve good things in their life. And I believe it's available. And that's a new belief, right? So I have a healthy skepticism, but the cynicism has been put away.
What a lovely phrase. That's going in my wrap-up notes, Mike. I love that. What a fantastic quote. And what's really interesting, because myself, as you know, as well as me having a passion like yourself for more human-centered, more human-centered world or human-focused world, I'm also in international sales. So it really resonates when you're talking about this competitive sort of approach to life, whether it comes from your sports or whether it's be the world of work. And I found it to be so freeing, actually, to be looking over at someone or coming on the Humans First platform or connecting with someone on LinkedIn and connecting from a point of genuine interest and curiosity, and not because you're trying to get business. Like that for me is as recent as the last 12 months, really.
Yeah. And isn't it amazing that you get to have that choice, Gary? That it becomes your approach. It becomes a changed mindset. And then all of a sudden you flip to abundance rather than scarcity, right? It's not like I don't have to go take that scrap or the piece of pie to get my hands on. I can actually grow the pie, that's a wonderful place to come from.
It's beautiful. So tell me, Mike, who or what is inspiring you the most right now? I like to throw a random question in at times. So
it's the many people around me that have come into my life, Gary, that I otherwise would not have found or discovered had I not turned and gone down this path. Mm-hmm. And while I would like to say that I could point to one person that is really influential, I think what's amazed me the most is how many people have provided support and encouragement and put fuel in my tank to continue along this experiment or this journey of discovery that I'm on. Some of those folks have been on your podcast. Kevin Monroe is one of them, Kimberly Davis, Renee Smith, and Claude Silver, has I truly love Claude, and the conversations that we have and the belief that she sets out every day and shares for people it's very real. And I know that because I've gotten to know her well enough. There's very good models for us out there. And, Mark LeBusque has been a big supporter and helped me stay strong in the pursuit. And so I name names, and as soon as you do, then you start leaving some out. So I apologize for those I did not mention, but I wanted to really try to clarify that there have been so many wonderful people that have stepped in and stepped up and put energy into the whole thing without seeking any personal gain. Truly is inspiring.
That's wonderful. And, I give gratitude to all the people you mentioned. I have to say, particularly Claude Silver as well, when I met her in London back in February. And yeah, it's just, you say, the congruence, the authenticity, the genuine care that all of the people you mentioned have for us trying to connect on a human level. It's wonderful, isn't it? It's just wonderful.
It really is. And, it's exciting because we can look forward into what's going to happen next, right? We're still getting together each month in these live Humans First experiences. I can't wait to get to other countries and make that truly global. But, in the meantime, as people have raised their hands, that is what prompted me to start this playground is then let's all together create a place where we can be all together. And you've heard me say before, Gary, I mean, this whole Humans First movement or Humans First Club is not to be owned. It's to be shared. It's not mine. It's ours. And I just truly believe that it lives outside of me. It's not my business. It's just this thing I participate in like the rest of us do. And, I'm a business person and a consultant. And so I get to play on that playground and along with everybody else. I just happen to be the guy that, kind of, has to rake the field at the end of the day.
I love that. And I love the equality of the message, Mike. Look, as we look to wrap up, it's just wonderful talking to you. I want to give you the last word, Mike. What would you like my listeners to take away? If you was going to give one message, one sort of key, maybe call to action, or just something to inspire them to go away from this conversation and maybe look into something that you're interested in.
The thing that we bump into so often, Gary, and in my consulting business as I'm working with companies, is that disbelief that things can change. And so we have this operating with a sense of despair. And what is truly happening is there's energy and movement towards an evolved state where we can all discover and bring our gifts. Matter of fact, it's going to be necessary because there's a lot of change coming at us that will require us to grow and be different. And starting the journey on our own, even if we're not being encouraged by all of those around us, we will then end up being the leaders when that is most needed. And so my real message is just of encouragement that all sounds really nice and pretty, but it's not real in my organization. It's not allowed to happen. And what I would say is, maybe not organizationally or organization-wide right now, but certainly in each of the lives you touch each day. And as soon as that change starts to happen, then it expands around us. And I think what we're finding, like this conversation, like the friendship I'm excited to develop with you, Gary, is then people come together and strengthen each other, and it grows. And there's thousands of us. There really are thousands of us. And we're finding each other. And that's a good thing. Have hope.
That's wonderful. And you know something, it reminds me of my guest from last week, Nilofer Merchant, and she talks about we all need to celebrate our unique, what she calls onlyness, that view of the world that only we can all see. And as we join all of that together, everything amplifies, which is beautiful.
Yeah. And what a great service that you're bringing by allowing these voices into that conversation, right? A platform that brings those ideas out, and it's not one idea, it's the many ideas. And the arrow points in the same direction, but then we realize that, there's 1,000 ramps and 1,000 doorways onto a better path. We don't have to all find ourselves herding through one open doorway. We can be that bridge and doorway for each other. And thank you for creating that opportunity for all of us to share.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate that, Mike. And as can you give the details to my listeners right now? How can they find you online? And also maybe just a little bit more about the Humans First Playground. How do people sign up? What's the URL? Just maybe a little bit more detail, Mike. That would be great.
Yes. The playground is new. The playground is open. and it is humansfirstplayground.com. And the humansfirst.club website is for the event series itself. It talks a little bit about the mission and why we're here, what we're trying to do together. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. There's forms to fill out on each of those URLs. mjvacanti.com is my consulting website. So please reach out. I'm very accessible. I love people. It's what gets me up and drives me every day.
That's wonderful. Well, I'll make sure those details are left in the show notes. And I'll just one more thing for you, Mike. For me, you can know for sure that you've left my day better from this conversation. So thanks very much for that.
Thank you, Gary. This has just been so comfortable, and I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you.
Lovely. We'll keep in touch. Speak soon, Mike. All the best.
Thank you.